Hello and welcome back to the next episode of a new series where I'll be going over ship design philosophy, as well as ship design rules, ship design things that you should be looking out for. Now, a disclaimer before we start is that I am not the best player at this game. I do not know everything about this game. I do not know the best ship compositions. I tend to most time design for RP rather than for optimization and for military, the best military you can make. Now, that being said, I do know quite a few things. I do know some stuff that can be quite helpful to newer and lower level players. So don't immediately think just because I do this in a certain way, you have to, or that my way is the best way, or I'm trying to make it sound like that. Okay? So today we're going to be talking about ship design philosophy, and how I I particularly like to design my ships, and the basic methodology you're going to be needing here. So I've got a notepad here up really quickly, and as you can see, this is the basic ship design methodology you should really have, in my opinion, before you design a ship. So first off, ask yourself, what is the purpose of the ship you are designing? If the ship serves no purpose, why are you building it? You need that logical breakthrough, a logical methodology of why are you doing this, why do you need this, why does your empire need this, etc. So for the example, I said to defend outer colonies effectively for a cheap cost. So I'm wanting to design like a corvette or a small vessel, and that is going to be the purpose of the ship we are designing. How are you going to achieve that purpose? So I'm going to achieve that purpose by designing the ship with this weapon or that reactor or those shields, or I'm going to reduce cost by using components that were used on earlier generations of ships, or I'm going to use these kinds of components, essentially. So, what is the purpose of the ship you're designing? How are you going to achieve that purpose? And then, what is going to be required to fulfill that purpose? So, we're looking at resources, logistics, fuel, minerals, logistics, supply, like everything. What is going to be needed to achieve that? Research costs, all of these different things, wealth costs, all these things to achieve this purpose, and is it the most efficient? You if you're not able to fulfill that purpose with the required other things that you have, and you're not able to meet the required resources, then you shouldn't build the ship. So this is the very basic design methodology. Now you can obviously expand on this as you can go into like what's the purpose of the ship designing, and then if there's no purpose, then you can go into something else. But this is just basic kind of design philosophy. So next thing we're gonna look at is just basic ship design. I am going to just quickly get up the correct game here, because for some reason we're not in the correct game. It should be up in just a second. There are lots of different philosophies and there's different doctrines, and I will be covering different kinds of naval and fleet doctrines in the upcoming videos in this series. But suffice it to say, every ship should have a purpose, like in that methodology. So let's look at this destroyer to get some inspiration. So I designed this destroyer to provide me with a small, quick, and effective weapon system. I also had RP in mind, so I had to change some things around. So that's why it's got troop capacity of 300. That's why it's got a few other things added onto it. So the Mac cannon and the high velocity cannon here, what are they designed to do? Why? How do they fulfill the purpose that I'm trying to accomplish it? Well, they provide me with long range hitting power that can hit a opponent very, very hard. And if I make a lot of these are quite cheap in comparison for a destroyer. And if I make a lot of these, that's 4 strength 12 hits. That's hitting it really, really hard and burst fire, and that's really, really useful. They also provide escort duty as they are destroyers, and they can deal with missiles and other targeting systems and things like that. And they provide interdiction through their components there. So that is why this ship's designed. Now let's go to another ship to think about it. the Sigma class Mark II strike carrier. So the point. So let's get up our methodology again. Okay, our methodology. So what is the purpose of the ship you're designing? Okay, for the Sigma class strike carrier, the purpose is I need a carrier that I can base out strike interceptors to deal with enemy ships, with ability to send long range interceptors to deal with stuff, as well as troop carriers to carry forces to entween. It also allows me to it's a capital ship that allows me to coordinate fire. It has lots of point defense guns. It has magnetic accelerator rail, so it can hold its own. And the general purpose of the ship is to provide heavy hitting power with great strike capabilities through the fighters, and also the ability to carry a decent amount of troops into battle to provide ground support and boarding action support. How am I going to achieve that purpose? I'm achieving it through my troop transport base, my hangar deck capacity, my weapon systems, and my strike group ships, which are my troop carriers and my strike interceptors. What is going to need to require to fill that purpose? Resources. So 5,200 build points. You're going to need 800 crew members. I'm going to need logistics supplies. I'm going to need tankers and refueling stations. And so there's more ships that I'm going to need. I'm going to need ordnance factories to produce ordnance for the fighters. I'm going to need officers and all of these things that I'm going to need to be able to fill that purpose. And now I've managed to get those things, and I fulfilled this purpose for this ship. Okay, so now that we've kind of gone through the basic ship methodology, we're going to talk a little bit more on just the design systems, as well as the purpose behind each weapon and what its actual uses. So, don't get confused by the weapon system here. These are just named. This is a Gauss cannon. This is a particle lance, etc. So we're going to go through the weapon systems and also a few other things. So in terms of energy weapons, the laser, which is the pretty normal one, a few things about laser. It can be spinally mounted, which will allow it to increase its range and damage, as well as its size and power requirements. In exchange, but you can only have one of them. So basically, the idea is you build the ship around the weapon instead of the weapon onto the ship. And it has a decent amount of range. It has about the same range as a railgun. It does have drop off though, as it's a laser. So basically, it can shoot at a certain distance, but the closer it is, the more damage it will do, and the longer it is, the less damage it will do, because that's kind of the law behind lasers traveling in space. There's a massive fall off there. The next thing is particle beams. So particle beams essentially are lasers, but they don't have any fall off, and they have much more range compared to lasers. But they also can't be turreted. Lasers can be turreted, so they can be used for PD, even though they're not the best PD. Particle beams can't be turreted. They have less overall DPS than a laser because of rate of fire. But they do have that a little bit extra longer range. They don't have fall off, and so they're a consistent weapon. They're very consistent. Particle lancers. They essentially allow you to the type of damage that they do to an enemy ship basically means that they will focus all of their fire through one layer. So instead of doing the normal diagonal penetration where it will hit 1 point here, 1 point here, then 1 point above. So if we go to a ship that I can show you, the plot here. If we look at armor status, so instead of it going 1, then 2, then 3, and then damaging into the second layer like that, instead it will just go straight down the line. So this is essentially, it drills through the hull. So it has the same range as a particle beam, but it's going to have more damage. And it also has that special weapon type where it literally will drill through the hull and penetrate and do a lot of damage there. So particle lancers are really, really good at hitting very, very hard in single strikes. Now, the downside to them compared to particle beams and lasers is they have very slow recharge times. They require more power, and they are more costly, and they are bigger in size for your ship. Okay. Now we're going to go back and we're going to look at further energy weapons and weapons in general. So, Mesons, basically how they work is they do damage that ignores a certain amount of armor. So, essentially they got nerfed from VB6 because the VB6 they generally ignored like literally all armor, but now they only avoid a certain percent of it each time they go through the layer. So I believe it's 50% at the start, and then it goes up and up and up, so on and so forth. Don't quote me on that. I don't use mesons, I don't use micros, and I don't use micros, mesons, or carronades very often, so I don't know all of the ins and outs about them, or microwaves, yeah. So that's generally how they work. They can be pretty useful in terms of fighters and just like spamming meson fighters, but generally, these weapons you want to stay away from, but they're definitely useful. Microwaves, they have an interesting damage pattern, and they only do, I think, 1 damage, but they have a chance to penetrate or something like that. Again, I'm going to skip over these. I apologize. I'm sure other people will cover them more explicitly, but I don't really use them that much. Carronades are really good early game weapons. They have longer range early game, and they also have quite high DPS. But the problem with them, and they're also very cheap as well. The problem with them is that later in the game, their damage type, the amount of damage they do, their range just becomes obsolete, and they just don't become useful anymore. And as such, there's really no point to using them. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to look at is going to be missiles and kinetic weapons. So railguns are basically they fire multiple shots in one like volley. So like if you fire a railgun, it'll fire 4 shots, dealing 4 damage each. So they're like 16 damage, right? So they're very good at just like a lot of hitting power, and they have more range than Gauss. They can't be turreted, and as such, they are generally used versus ships rather than for PD. Gauss cannons are the best point defense system outside of anything longer range like AMMs. They have extremely high rates of fire. They have very short range, so it means they're basically only used for final defensive fire. And you can fit lots and lots and lots of them on. Another thing about Gauss, accordingly, is that unlike lasers, they don't go up in centimeters, they go up in size. So their hit percentage is based on that size. So at size 6, 100%, at size 1, 17%. So you've got 2 different doctrines for Gauss. You either go tons of weapons and you negate the fact that they're small by just there's so much weight of fire being fired that it doesn't matter and overpowers that, or you go bigger Gauss cannons that will be bigger, but they'll hit much more often and they'll be able to deal with threats much better. I subscribe to the camp of just weight of volume and fire, but you can obviously go in the other camp. The next thing is missiles. Missiles are generally worse at lower techs, but can become extremely useful. AMMs are the best longer range anti-missile counter, so anti-missile missiles. And ASMs can be extremely useful, especially for planetary bombardment, as they do 100,000 damage per warhead strength. And they can have extra radiation and things like that. There are lots of different tactics for missiles. I will not go over them here because that will take a long time. But suffice it to say, missiles are a very useful part of the game, and you should definitely look into getting them. Okay. We're going to go into other philosophy here around certain key topics in the future, but right now I'm going to end this here. So we went over methodology, we went over each kind of weapon system and what they do, as well as their uses. In the next couple of episodes, I'll be going over carrier doctrine, missile doctrine, various other kinds of doctrines, as well as purposes, how to more design a fresh ship at certain attacks, what you should be looking for, things like that. But for now, I'm going to be ending this episode. I hope you did enjoy. This is setting the groundwork for the next episodes in the series, and I'll see you next time. I hope you had a good one. and please do like and subscribe, as all the support is definitely appreciated. I'll see you next time.